Let's talk about Marlowe's translation of Ovid's Amores. Ovid's love elegies from around the first century AD. These racy, funny, irreverent love poems, or if you like, lust poems. The original title is Amores. That is, amore is the word for love. Latin has different words for love. This is not love your neighbor. This is the love you're not supposed to have for your neighbor or your neighbor's spouse. It's erotic love, romantic love. When the moon hits your eye like a big pizza pie, it's amore. What we know of what survives of Marlowe's work are basically plays and translations. Yes, there's that very short pastoral poem. But other than that, when he's written as a non-dramatic poet, he is typically a translator. He does not write his own original things, but he translates works of the classics into English, works that had otherwise gone untranslated. In 21st century American literary culture, translation is not kind of at the top of our food chain of writerly skills. We view original novelists as more important and interesting than translators. Translators are considered second rate. In Elizabethan England, translation is an important and prestigious literary activity, and translation is crucial to the project of creating a national literature that's fully independent. One of the ways English becomes a full service, one language, all you need language for all literary purposes is by translating all the beloved works from the classics into English. The way to move from being a bilingual society that is dependent on a foreign language for all of its prestigious high value texts to a essentially monolingual society that is where the vernacular language, the language everybody speaks, is also the primary literary language, is by translating. This is important. The earlier Elizabethans, and Elizabeth reigned a long time, were doing a lot of translation. Marlowe is showing up to keep translating Ovid and Musaeus, who we'll see, Lucan. Um, we don't know how this fits in his career plans. We don't know when any of these translations were made. They're all published after his death, as most of the plays are. When is he doing it? Why is he doing it? What does he think he's doing? I don't know. But in terms of what was happening with Marlowe's personal career, the presumption has to be that he is making these scholarly and poetically beautiful translations. Elizabethan translation heavily emphasizes prettiness, the beauty of the English text over mere accuracy. In fact, Elizabethan translators are generally much less accurate than we now expect translators to be. Their priority is to make it sound good in English, not to give you the text. Remember, all educated people also speak Latin. You can just, if you really want to know what it says, you can check the Latin. We need to make it pretty in English. Marlowe is actually very, very accurate, partly because he has so much game as a poet that he can make his translation accurate and pretty. He doesn't have to choose because he's Kit Marlowe and he has some skills. Presumably, he's making these to impress patrons, to have some kind of scholarly or artistic career that would lead him to some kind of employment. These are not books to be sold. We also think today of the way a writer becomes rich, or at least self-sufficient, selling to public markets. Gonna get a book published, gonna get it out there. The more the more normal, actually, nobody gets rich that way in Marlowe's England. No writers get rich selling their books to the printers. Some printers make some money, some lose some money, but no writers get rich that way. That's just not, the system isn't set up that way. The preferred mode is to write high end stuff that attracts a wealthy, powerful, aristocratic patron or patrons and advance in the world that way. What we would call the Spencer model, which works mostly pretty well for Spencer. The things that Marlowe writes for the stage are probably things written quickly for short money. He made money, but he didn't make a lot of money. That's not a living. It's certainly not a way to get rich. No playwrights got rich in the Elizabethan theater unless they were actors and playhouse owners too. Shakespeare Shakespeare doesn't get rich on his writing. His writing helps him get rich as an actor and playhouse owner. Marlowe is just a writer. He's not going to make some money. So his writing career is divided between things he's writing for relatively quick cash for the public markets, for the theaters, which don't have a lot of prestige, and these attempts at creating these prestigious translations that can attract him patronage. That's the way to really get ahead in the world. How did this work? We have no idea. He dies young and without attracting any powerful patrons. Okay. Who is Ovid? Ovid is one of the two most important Roman poets ever. He goes along with Virgil as the big two. The third is Horace. The so-called Augustan poets who flourished during the reign of Augustus, the first emperor. These are the poets who actually set the golden age of Latin literature up. They are the most canonical figures of the most canonical period of Roman literature. And together, Virgil and Ovid are central to the English educational system. These are the poets you are held up for. Virgil, who we'll see Marlowe imitating later in Dido, Queen of Carthage, Virgil is the related to authority. He's the one, actually, talk about patronage. Virgil's the one who gets a patron. He is the protege of Augustus and of one of Augustus's powerful followers. He writes an epic poem called the Aeneid. Dido, Queen of Carthage, is a kind of loose translation or adaptation of parts of the Aeneid about what it's like to be a great virtuous Roman, etc., etc. He's about empire and nationalism and civic virtue and heroism. Ovid is about sex jokes. Ovid is irreverent. Ovid is funny. Ovid is about illicit sex of various kinds of escapades. Ovid's most famous work is not the Amores, but a work called the Metamorphoses. Why did Marlowe not translate the Metamorphoses? Everybody else had already translated the Metamorphoses, which is a long series. About 80% of all the myths you find mentioned in Elizabethan drama are in the Metamorphoses. All these stories of gods and goddesses and nymphs and heroes being transformed into other things, into trees, into birds. And it takes the Olympian gods with a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek, a little disrespectful or playful. Ovid is playful towards people like Jupiter, king of the gods, father of the Romans, but also somebody who turns into a farm animal in order to cheat on his wife. So there's a little playfulness there. We can be a little irreverent. We might see why Marlowe is attracted to Ovid, who's funny and irreverent, and these things that we associate Marlowe with being much more than being Virgilian. The Metamorphoses, nonetheless, are beloved, and there's a long tradition of Christian readers in the Middle Ages and the early modern period of moralizing Ovid. The phrase is the Ovid moralisé, the moralized Ovid, where you take, especially the Metamorphoses, and turn them into sophisticated allegorical readings that give you philosophical and moral and Christian compatible takeaways. There was actually really a bunch of funny stories about gods turning into stuff because they want sex. Now, every major European language translates the Metamorphoses. It is at the center of of the European early modern curriculum. Just it had been near the center of the grammar school curriculum in the Middle Ages, or the pre-university curriculum in the Middle Ages. Everybody loves the Metamorphoses. It is a precious thing. Nobody but Marlowe translates the Amores. And by I mean nobody, the Amores is only translated in the 16th century. The Amores are only translated into one European language, Marlowe's translation into English. This is the Ovid people leave alone. Ovid is also somebody who, while Virgil is has like the patronage of the emperor himself and is like rising high in Rome and is the most favored poet. Ovid gets exiled. The emperor kicks him out of Rome for reasons that aren't clear. Ovid's own phrase is he was kicked out for Carmen et error, a song and a mistake. So a poem and a mistake got him kicked out into what is now Romania, which he viewed as kind of he found the climate inhospitable. He wanted to get back to the city. So Ovid's in exile because he's in disfavor with authority. Marlowe takes the kind of least this forbidden, this slightly on the edge, slightly transgressive set of poems by this simultaneously canonical and subversive figure, and he runs with it, and he runs with the full playfulness and naughtiness of Ovid. um, did this get Marlowe in trouble? No, because Marlowe died before it could get him into trouble. The other way to look at it is like this got Marlowe into trouble after he was dead. Um, this translation, the only translation in early modern or Renaissance Europe into any language. It's not in French, it's not in Italian, it's not in Spanish, it's just in English, just in Marlowe's translation. It gets burned. So one day in 1599, the Bishop of London and the Archbishop of Canterbury, meaning the head bishop, the head archbishop of the Church of England, go into St. Paul's Cathedral churchyard in London, which is also where the center of the book selling industry, and they make a massive bonfire of many, many, many books. They have a major book burning and book banning. The so-called bishop's ban. They have a long list. Some actual writers are forbidden to ever publish again. Very doctrinaire, very authoritarian, a lot of censorship. On that list is the first version. It's an excerpt of Marlowe's translation of the Amores, combined with some epigrams by another poet. They may have wanted the epigrams, not most of what they were burning that day was satire of some kind or another. The authorities were terrified of satire. They disliked it. They thought it was unruly. They thought it was subversive. They wanted to ban all of it. And the fact that it's like these epigrams and then also these sex poems by Marlowe, I mean by translated from by Ovid, translated by Marlowe, go together. On the other hand, those those poems were put with the epigrams that were kind of a little bit on the line. Here's the thing, even the book that they're burning, the pre-1599 version of the epigrams, and was selected with like a selection of the elegies, looks very surreptitious. It doesn't really list the publisher's name. It has what's almost certainly a false place of publication. It says at Middelburg, meaning in the Netherlands. It's almost certainly not printed in the Netherlands. It's classic slipshod 16th century English printing. Instead of having a printer's ornament like you'll see in others, it's just a bunch of this is a bunch of geometric patterns, right? There's some people who will tell you that lots of early plays are kind of pirated editions and surreptitious and dirty rotten and all that stuff and trickery, but no, like they will actually claim that the first edition, some people actually have claimed that the first edition of Faustus, the A text, is a surreptitious, stolen pirate text. But if you look at that text, it's very clear who printed it. He puts an ornament with his own initials right on there, and like then there's the publisher's name underneath it. This is not a pirate text. This is just publishing. The epigrams and amores and elegies that get burned in 1599, it doesn't have anybody's name, my initials. There's nothing that can identify it. We do not know who printed it or where. It is a bootleg publication right from go. So printers are maybe not 100% surprised that this gets piled up in a bonfire and burned. Is this the end of it? No. After the ban, you get a complete edition with those epigrams, but still with the epigrams, but also with all of the amores. Here we have Marlowe's complete translation, and even daringly another poet, Ben Jonson, has kind of revised one of the translations to make Marlowe's poetics more regular. His iambic pentameter isn't iambic enough for Ben Jonson. Ask me about that in class. That is totally. It says it's from Middleborough, and that it's not from. It's maybe from Scotland. It's maybe some secret press. There may be a pun there, Middleburg, and suggest the middle of town, like it's a foreign space, but really we printed it somewhere in the middle of London. Okay, so Marlowe has published a text that gets banned and then is published surreptitiously despite the authorities. It's banned and they just keep printing it. And he's not in trouble himself because, he can't get any more trouble. He's already been stabbed to death. But continuing to remain a subversive figure. The translations themselves are bravura. They are virtuosic. It is the nature of translations, especially or faithful translations, to get longer. Attempting to get everything in the original tends to be the most concise and beautiful version of that. The attempt to unpack everything that the literary language is suggesting or telling us tends to make translations expand. Translations are virtually never shorter than the original text. They're almost always longer. Marlowe translates Ovid himself, a brilliant magisterial poet, line by line. No wiggle room at all. One line of Ovid, one line of Marlowe. He can get all the information in Ovid into English in the same line, losing nothing and staying pretty and funny, having good meter. All of it. There are there are no errors in this. There are no translation errors. Marlowe is much too good a scholar for that. There are a couple places that will seem like errors if you compare this translation to, a, say, Penguin translation, which will be much longer and not as pretty, or the kind of like Harvard Classics or Loeb Classic Library edition, which will be like very literal and go on longer. Those are not Marlowe's translation errors. Those are errors, we now believe, in the editions he was using. Those are moments where the 16th century edition of Ovid reads differently than the editions we do now, where we've gone back and kind of checked the scholarship and corrected some things. That's what's happening there. One line of Ovid, one line of Marlowe. No mistakes. Accuracy is the number two value, but he can do that too. He's perfectly accurate. He's beautiful. There are lots of jokes. If you find some of this scandalous, maybe. Can you blame Marlowe? Or can you blame Ovid? What the hell? Blame them both. Here, Ovid, and as your editor points out, these poems are sexually subversive, but super heterosexual. Complicating simple ideas about Marlowe's sexuality, but we don't necessarily believe that or making that maybe Marlowe is not exclusively heterosexual either. Maybe he's interested in all kinds of subversive sex. Let's read those poems and see what you think in class.